In the last video, we looked at voice interfaces, which are an attempt for humans to communicate more naturally with a computer. In this video, we'll talk about gesture interfaces that are another attempt for computers to communicate more naturally with humans. And this time, they are trying to understand human body. So basically, gesture interfaces can understand human gestures by using some mathematical algorithms. Gestures can originate from any bodily motion or state, but commonly it originates from face and hand. Users can use simple gestures to control or interact with devices without physically touching them. Gesture interfaces involve usage of cameras, sensors, and computer vision techniques. You must have seen gesture-based interfaces in which people are wearing gloves. These gloves have sensors embedded in them. When people are making hand gestures or hand motions or arm motions, cameras are trying to track the location of these sensors. And by tracking those locations, the computer algorithms are able to figure out what kind of gestures are people making. Now, it's very important to understand that there are two kinds of gesture interfaces: touchscreen or the touch-based interfaces or touchless interfaces. So touch-based interfaces don't involve the use of external hardware like cameras or sensors. The touchscreens are able to understand people's gestures by tracking their movement, by tracking where the user is applying pressure on the screen. Whereas in the touchless interfaces, people have to wear some sensor, some gloves in their hands, and then the room itself in which the gestures are being happening, they are usually equipped with a lot of cameras. So there might be a lot of cameras on the ceiling here that are tracking the user's motion and then computationally trying to understand what it means. So gesture interfaces are being used in operating room because when the surgeon is operating on a patient, they might want to understand different views that they are seeing inside the patient's body, and they can do it with signaling to the monitor and asking the monitor to, for example, show them different views of the patient's body. Gesture interfaces are also found inside cars because when users are driving, we don't want them to be engaged in touching screens and making decisions on the screen. So the best way for them to achieve any goal that they might want to achieve during driving is to give them the ability to do some gestures that can then be recognized by the interface itself. Gestures are also being widely used in exercise and gaming. A lot of video games take advantage of children's instincts of dancing, and in some cases, these gesture interfaces try to teach different movements to the user. So there are many pros and obviously there are many cons of gesture interfaces. First of all, because gesture interfaces are using one of the very natural interactions, it's an interaction that everybody is very familiar with. So it helps them become more comfortable with using technology. I showed you the example of surgeons and children in a gaming environment or for exercising, for driving. For some users and some tasks and some environments, gesture-based interfaces might be the only solution. And even for some users, for example, people who are in wheelchairs, gesture-based interfaces might be a very good option for them. So what are some of the cons of gesture-based interfaces? First of all, they are computationally extremely expensive. A lot of cameras are needed to track users' motions, and then these motions have to be computationally understood by the computer. So a lot of computation is taking place in order to make gesture interfaces more successful. And it is possible, while they can include a lot of users, they may also exclude certain users. So, for example, people with prosthesis of hand, maybe they might not be able to make certain gestures. So, gesture based interfaces won't work for them. And also, gesture based interfaces do capitalize on a very natural human language, but at the same time, if gesture based interfaces are too complex, they require very complex gestures, then they are going to become less and less user friendly. So, when we are designing gesture based interfaces, we have to make sure that we are not designing our system to recognize too many complex gestures. Gestures should be simple and natural. Some research and design considerations for gesture-based interfaces. Firstly, computer really have to understand at what point the user has started to make a gesture that needs to be understood by the computer, and obviously at what point the user is stopping the gesture. The computer has to figure out which gesture is supposed to be understood and which gesture is supposed to be ignored. And this could be a challenge. And then there's another issue: what degree the gestures have to be performed in order to be believable by the computer. So this can also become a challenge, because it's possible that some people can only do certain kind of motions because of their body works in a certain way, so they might not be able to do a full arm gesture, but they can only move their arm in to a certain extent. So how does a computer understand this about a person? And obviously, for some situations, gestures might not be the best solution. Maybe it's easier to just tap on the screen and open an app rather than making one gesture to open my health app, another gesture to open my navigation app, and so on and so forth.